Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ken Viciana. I'm on the TAG Data Governance Society Board. I wanted to thank you all for joining us today for this webinar. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our partner sponsor, Collibra, for sticking with us through the pandemic and through these difficult times. I hope everyone's families are well and safe, and really optimistic that later this year we'll be able to get together for some live events. So definitely looking forward to that. Our speaker today, we're very lucky. We have Mona Pomraning from Collibra. She's been in the data space for a long time, has a wealth of knowledge on data governance, and today she's going to share some best practices. I think it's a good way to kind of level set the group. And if you have questions or comments throughout, feel free to message me in the chat, and I will tee those up for Mona as we go throughout the session. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Mona.
Okay, thanks, Ken, for inviting me. So today our presentation topic is data governance best practices. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I counted 17 slides. We can go as fast or slow as you want. Let me go ahead and share the deck right quick. And let me know if you guys can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so data governance leading practice. I should say I've been doing data governance way before it was actually called data governance. I think my first role out of college is I was traditionally what we would now call a data steward. So, and then when I did my master's thesis, I actually did it on what today we would call data governance. So I've been doing this for years. So these are my thoughts. These are not necessarily Collibra thoughts, but they do align with Collibra. So with that, let me go ahead in the deck to the next slide. So the first thing I always tell people is data governance is a journey. If you want to rapidly start up a program, the best way to do it is to do it very slow, which seems like an oxymoron. But what I found through all of the programs that I've worked on in the past is the programs that crash and burn are programs that try to go too fast. So best practice or leading practice is start very small, do incremental growth. And then the other thing is manage your data governance program with actually a project plan, do an annual update. And the other big thing to do is as you're setting up data governance, use your data owners as business sponsors and project approvers. Do you guys have any questions, or should I just keep going?
Keep going.
Okay, so the next thing I always think of is data governance is people, process, and technology. And I always tell people they're actually in that order. Thinking back about 6, maybe 7 years ago, I was in a conference panel. I think it was Aaron Zorn's MDM, Data Governance, Data Quality conference. And I actually made the statement there that technology doesn't matter. Make sure to do your people, make sure to use process. When you get those two up and running, go ahead and add technology. And the reason we were saying that back then is first, there wasn't much technology available. And second, if you try to add technology too fast, you focus on technology and you forget the other two. So that was true 6, 7 years ago. Today, it's a slightly different world. There's so much data, and data is coming so fast at us that we can no longer ignore technology. So when we do it in a more balanced way. So I think of the people as, these are all the people that are part of my data governance community. The processes is all the things that community does to govern their data. And then the technology is the platform to automate data governance. So you need all three. And you need to do them for the most part at the same time. Up until a year ago, I was actually asking people to hold off on the technology until they had prototyped their processes. I'm no longer even asking people to do that. And it's because the technology vendors have advanced so much in the last 3 years that you can really start using technology on day one. Okay, So when you set up data governance, the one thing you want to do is you want to give your people something to do. And, if you look at it from like the SEI CMN maturity model, what you want is you want a standard repeatable process. So think of your data stewards as you want them to be managing data assets. What are they going to do in the beginning? They're starting with their data definitions. They're trying to figure out what their system of records are. They're trying to figure out what the classifications are. When they get all that kind of work done, then they're going to extend to trying to figure out what kind of data quality do I actually have, and is it good enough? And what should my benchmarks be? Which data quality dimensions do I want? And then when you start thinking about profiling and data quality, then the next thing you want to do is you want to have those stewards start writing data plans. And we'll talk about data plans in a minute, but that's something that a lot of data governance programs do not have. And I actually think this is one of the missing links in many places. The next big part of your community is the data owners. We've gone a lot of ways with data owners. Sometimes I've actually been talking to companies where they decided to get rid of the data owners. And I actually think that's wrong. I think we should keep our data owners and keep them more in the managing and the approval. So we're not asking them to be full-time. They're really there from an approval, and they're removing roadblock blocks. They're helping people get budget. They're appointing the stewards. And if those data stewards write a data plan, they're actually approving the data plan. So we don't need a lot of their time. I like about 10%, anything less than 10%. My HR friends tell me that if I do less than 10% on a job description, that part of the job description will always be out prioritized. So I like to set them at about 10%. Then the next big part of your community is these things that we typically call working groups. And then working groups are really where all the interesting work actually gets done. And they're usually organized with a combination of owners and stewards. And again, in many companies, the owners might be very lightweight. They may or may not come to the meetings, but if they do, they're usually someone there as like the owner of the meeting, more in an approval standpoint. And then the stewards are there taking care of their data, whatever it is. The last data working group that I sat in on, the stewards were going through a migration period where they were trying to get everything out in a data lake environment. And they were going through trying to figure out what data to migrate into new apps and then what data to ingest in their data lake. So it was really interesting. Like, they were talking about CRUDs. They were talking about what is the real definition? What is the system of record when we create this new piece of data? So it was very technical data work, and it was work being done by the business with some help from IT. The other part of our data community that we have is the data council. This is another one where I see a lot of people have regrets, is you don't want to start your data council until you have something for the council to do. You also don't want that council to meet very often. So I usually think once a quarter is about right. And I usually, like if I have KPIs, I'll show them the KPIs. If there's major things that we want the business to weigh in on and decision-making, I include them, but I keep the council more at a decision-making body and less at a escalation body.
Yeah, I think one question on this slide, Mona, just the thing that pops out to me, I know run into some issues through my career, is that whole data owner bucket you have there, because that's usually somebody who's not specifically on the data team, right? It's usually somebody in the business who kind of has a vested interest in a specific, data point. I remember I was at another company years back, and we had a risk score that was developed by risk management. So we had the VP of risk management kind of labeled as the data owner. And the dialogue I had with him is he would say, well, you're the data team, so you own it, right? I don't own it. I own risk management. So just, I'm just wondering how those conversations go, or do you have any thoughts on how to smooth that over, right? If you're trying to assign data owners, what does that kind of look like?
So a couple of things. First, I don't rush out and assign the data owners right off. I've found that if I assign the data stewards first, it's a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. I don't try to get my data owners on board until I have something to do. And that's why I created the concept of a data plan, because that's something that a senior business person can do. So it's a plan and they can approve the plan. Because they have domain expertise, because they have functional expertise, the content in the plan is just talking about how to take care of that data. And so that's the mechanism I've been using to engage business people appropriately, because they are not going to be there to decide CRUDs. Like, that's way too low a detail for them. They'll just like, seriously, you want me to do that? Like, there's no way I'm going to make time for that. But if you say, look, you know, how trustworthy does this data need to be? They can weigh in on that. They can weigh in on, you know, is it classified right? You know, is it highly sensitive data or is it not? Is it public data? They can care about that. They can care about the fact that the data stewards that have figured out all this data mapping and the data stuff, like, they won't want to go detail in it, but they will want to say, yep, it's done right. And so that's how I've engaged them. It is you have to be really careful because they're very senior people. We go after senior people because we want, you know, the business to drive data management. But if we try to if these people are just too busy for too detailed of work, so you have to be really creative on how you utilize them, or they will balk and refuse to come to the table.
Right. Thank you.
I think when I was at BP, I asked my data owners to sign off on the data models, which back then was the cool thing. Everyone said do that. Like, I couldn't get anybody to do it. Like, not a one. And it's like, okay, well, we need something a little bit more creative, which is why I came on with this. Let's create this concept of a data plan, which is just a paper document that says, here's how I want to take care of data. And this is the data I'm taking care of. And this is what I think I want to do in the next 5 years for the data.
Great.
Okay. Anything else on this one?
Not yet.
Okay, let me go to the next one. Let's see what else I have. Sustainability and adoption. Look, anybody on the planet that can figure out how to hit Google can create a data governance program. It's dead on easy. There's a lot of material out there on the internet to tell you exactly step by step how to do it. Now, the materials don't all agree, but it's pretty easy to do. The hard part, by the way, is to keep a data governance program up and running. And so how do you do that? Well, one of the things that you can do is you can put together what I would call an adoption framework, which is really nothing more than an insurance policy to make sure that the investment that you put into building data governance is actually realized. So what exactly does adoption mean? So, and this, I took this directly out of out of Collibra. So I didn't make this up, but I agree with it. So that the components of an adoption framework are, how do I adapt my ecosystem? How do I facilitate it? How do I get people educated on it? How do I communicate data governance? How do I promote it? And how do I monitor it? If you can hit all those in a continuous refresh fashion, then you can have a framework, which will actually be, as I said, an insurance policy. You cannot guarantee success on anything. I've just learned that. I think I said that I've been doing this for a while. I would say the first 15 years that I was doing data management, every significant data management program that I was part of, and by significant, I mean these big mega 3-year, super high expensive programs, every single one of them failed to realize value, 100% failure rate. And it's like, wow, what is going on? And so I wasn't the first one to think about sustainability, but when we started creating that word sustainability, I really jumped on it because we needed something to help make sure that we had some success and to help people like me want to work in data governance, because nobody wants to work in a program that's so hard to keep running. And so then we have these. The question is, what do you mean by adoption? Well, adoption, again, I think of this more of your ecosystem. It's like, what technology do you have? What does your process look like? What's your operating model look like? What can you do to take that, to adapt it to your company? So it can be very simple things like, if you have a piece of technology, you can have like, welcome Pfizer, welcome, my data community board. And you can start putting in the company logos directly embedded in with your technologies. It can also be like, if you have a SharePoint site where you basically customize those by the various data domain communities. That's what I mean about adoption. And then facilitate, again, it's more about customizing the materials you've created in your program to resonate with your community. Education, I think, is probably the most important part of adoption, because without education, I can pretty much guarantee your program will fall flat because you're basically asking, when I do data governance, I'm asking for a company to change the way they think. I'm now asking them to create data as an asset. I'm basically trying to transfer the management of data from IT over into the business. So even if the business wants to do that, they don't know how to do that. And so education is a combination of some strategy stuff, like how do I write a data plan? How do I set up data quality? How do I profile data? How do I pick system of records? But it's also some more technical things about how do I do certain tasks in the technology. I think someone might have had a question.
Yeah, we did have a question. It was about how do you get buy-in from the C-suite on data governance? What tricks have you used to kind of work that? Because that's always a challenge, getting funding for a program.
Yes. So before, I think 3 companies ago, I worked for a company called British Petroleum. They upstream oil and gas. At the time I was working for them, they were the 3rd largest global end-to-end energy company on the planet. So how do you do it? Like, I found some cost savings for them and I took it to them and they're like, that's not even enough money to turn my head on. Like, go away. And so I spent some time trying to get data governance going there for a couple of years. At one point, I actually convinced the head of IT out of London to support making data plans. Now, I had actually written a data plan for my pipeline community, and I had talked my natural gas community into writing one. So I was their quote unquote architect, and I oversaw the plan, and I gave them templates and all that. And so I had 2 examples of plans. And Dana Deasley, who, I don't know, if you read the news, you might have heard his name. He actually decided that the company was going to do data plans. Now, he said every business unit in the company will do one. So yeah, like, I could have just fallen on the floor. I do remember the day he came to Houston and told us that. And I'm like, my life is now over. That's my golden ticket. So look, when golden tickets come, jump on them and jump on them fast. Now, fast forward today, if you've been into LinkedIn or in the internet, you'll see there's a lot of activity right now in the Department of Defense about data strategies and data management and creating what they're now calling data quality plans. By the way, that was also Dana. So he left BP, went to a huge bank in New York, and then went to the Department of Defense. And he's the one that I would credit with doing everything cool. Right now, you've seen the news about data strategies in the Department of Defense. Now, he said he's retired again, but he did hire the guy that created that whole cool program they've got running right now. So it's really hard to get the C-suite on board. Look, the C-suite cares about a lot of things. They care about reducing the risk. Like, I don't want to be fined with compliance. They care about saving money. Although if you're working in an oil and gas company, when oil and gas is doing well, it's got to be a huge cost saving, or they're not going to care. And they care about efficiencies. So if you want to engage the C-suite, you have to engage it using probably one of those levers. And then if you want them to do something, do it in their language, which is why I made up this thing called a data plan. Because that's what I saw business people doing. They had plans about how they were running their individual programs within their business. And so all this is adaptation of what business people were already doing. So again, it's the old-fashioned, talk their language. But feel free to steal the concept of the data plan.
Yeah, does what another question was the Damon, the gentleman you mentioned, does he have a book on any of this? Do you know?
He does not. But I mean, if you want to see some of the ideas on this, just go out and Google Department of Defense data management or data strategy. I think it's the guy that he hired was Sparks. And he actually sits in one of the CIO groups, and that is actually responsible for setting up the data for the Department of Defense. And they have 20 agencies. Go ahead.
I think a lot of the, when something bad happens, if a company is fined for not having their house in order, on regulations, or there's a breach or something, that often brings money into the data governance area, and it's recognized. What I like to see is when companies are proactively spending to prevent bad things from happening, right? But it's, how do you frame that? And I think you're right on. It's like you've got to hit the business with the value you're providing by the program, right? Painting the picture, like by having this program in place, we can save dollars in this area or mitigate risk. Any way you could obviously quantify on the business side always helps, but it's a little more of an art than a science, right? It just kind of depends on your business and getting your message across in the right way. So I think it's always interesting to hear stories of how people have approached this.
Yeah, it is an art, but it's the only thing that's going to get your program running. Like with British Petroleum, the reason we had money in natural gas, because back then natural gas was making money. It doesn't always, but during those years it was. And what they did is they figured out how to fund the data governance program by understanding that each one of the different departments within the business unit called natural gas was purchasing maps. These are third-party seismic data things that say where natural gas might be. And every time you purchase a map, you pay money, and then there's a licensing fee in it. They actually consolidated the purchasing of maps, and that saved so much money. It funded the entire line of business for data governance. And you're like, wow.
That's great.
Wow. So you can also extend that to any company that's purchasing third-party data. A lot of times that's not consolidated. You consolidate it purchasing and you can save money, and then you can use that for more interesting things.
Great.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I was going to also tell you so we didn't really have anyone wanting to be data owners at BP, and we didn't really push it too hard. Now, when Macondo exploded, and there's actually a movie on it, it's kind of a thriller, but it was a true story, is directly after Macondo exploded, I was having so much trouble getting anyone to step up to be a data owner that as soon as it exploded, legal said we must have a data owner for wells. Wells, by the way, in oil and gas is the single most important data domain. And within hours, I was named to be the data owner for wells.
Oh, wow.
Now, of course, that meant that I, within hours, said I'm leaving the company, which I then did. I was like, you don't want to take a job where you have accountability and you have responsibility, and you don't have any funding, and you're just going to be paid on, which is really what would have happened.
Right.
So, and I think the entire data management group left at that time. Most went to Accenture, some went to some of the other oil and gas companies. So it's kind of a sad time, but for the company, but I still enjoy the company. I just hated the fact that well exploded. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anything else on that, on good things, bad things? Again, if you look at our history, like during the war years where we're having World War II, the industries that were trying to create standards like nail sizes and rivets and all those, They were also having a hard time getting anyone to follow standards, but because of the war, they were able to, like, just because it was a cost savings, standardize on, the different kinds of raw materials and sizing units. So, I mean, historically, it's when things are really difficult and when cost saving is really important is when you see it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I talked a little bit of adoption, facilitate education. I mean, I could beat that one over the head. There's a ton of really cool nonprofit organizations that help do data management. When I'm setting up data governance, I tell the internal companies about those. And I said, look, figure out if you have a local chapter and join. I mean, it can be something like TAG, it can be something like DAMA, it can be something like the Data Governance Society. It could be like there's a Data Quality Society. It doesn't matter which one, but they all provide some really cool networking. And then through those, there's always really cool education.
Mm-hmm.
So the communication is also really important. It's just the other half of education. So I think of communication as light education, just trying to make people aware. Then you have promotion, which is similar again to communication, where you're trying to do some internal branding. With branding, I always thought the coolest idea I ever saw was from Stanford University. So I worked for a company called Cisco for a while. I was there for a little over a year. And so I took my entire data governance team to a night class on data governance. So I'm like, and I asked the company, I said, can you guys just pay for us to go to this night school? And I was surprised. They said, sure, let's go ahead. And so I took them all there. And so at the school, that school actually had their own data governance group. And so we talked about how they were internally doing them and doing data governance at the college. And one of the things that they had done is they had actually bought a sticker making machine and a button making machine. So when their data stewards did cool, amazing stuff, the data governance team would give them little stickers. And it's like, we're giving adults stickers, we're not 5. But you know what? It turned out that it worked out really well. Adults actually like to be thanked. And most times when you're talking with adults, you will give them 80% negative feedback and 20% positive. So with data governance, if you can flip the switch there, because most of these people are matrix to you, and start giving them some positive feedbacks, it's amazing how that helps. So that was their promotion things, but you can do a lot of stuff with promotion. I typically tell people, do not get a big promotion budget. Why, you say? Well, because you don't want the business to think that you are bureaucracy. So do inexpensive things. It could be just giving people a piece of blackjack gum. I was talking with a facilitator once, and they always gave that as a prize. Why? Because it was a really, really, really inexpensive prize, really, really hard to find. And at least the people they were working with, it brought back memories of childhood where they could buy this particular brand of chewing gum. And then the last one is monitor. So the successful programs always have some sort of monitor in there. So that is traditionally what we would call those KPIs. Could be also some of the data quality stuff. But the reason that I want monitoring in there is because if you can show some monitoring statistics that show that for whatever you're tracking, that somehow life is getting better because of your program, it's yet one more way to have an insurance against somebody wanting to cancel your program. I could probably spend a couple hours on KPIs. I would just say on KPIs, pick 2 or 3 behaviors and that you want to change and put your KPIs around those. Try to make them automated, try to make them meaningful. I'm trying to think, in Georgia, do you guys have like an airline, big, huge airline? A couple of years ago, the airline industry wanted to somehow change the behaviors around airplanes taking off on time. And so they decided to create a KPI. And the KPI was on time takeoff. Okay. I won't tell you which airline industry did this, but when they implemented it, the way they defined the business rule for that KPI was, did the aircraft shut the door at the scheduled time?
Mm-hmm.
Yes or no? So what does that mean? Okay, so I spent 10 years as a 100% travel person, lots of times in airports. So what that meant with that is, yes, they made their KPI. Of course they did, but the behavior changed. It used to be if you were doing connections, and I live in Portland, Oregon, I always connect. I don't get direct flights because I almost exclusively work on the East Coast. So I'm doing connections. In the past, before this KPI, if I was running from a connection from one part of the airport to the other, and maybe the connections was late, the airplane company would open the door and let me in. After the KPI, they wouldn't, because if the door opened, that meant they lost their KPI that trip. It also meant that people would actually sit there on the tarmac for, an extended amount of time because they met their KPI. Didn't mean they took off on time. So, I mean, if you create a KPI, just make sure it's meaningful, because behavior will change because of it, because people will want to change their KPI, and you don't want bad behavior to change. You don't want good behavior to change to bad behavior. Mm-hmm. Okay, anything else on sustainability or on adoption? Alrighty, probably enough on this slide. What is a data governance framework? So I can look at a lot of things here. So if I'm building a data governance framework, you have a lot of things around the people. So the first thing I would say is data governance is a function. It's not a project and it's not a program. The reason I say function is because it's a business entity like human resources or like security. You don't want it to have a start date and an end date. You can have a program to establish data governance, but you don't want to have a data governance program, about data governance. You want it to be considered a function. Consider culture. So I don't know if any of you guys in the audience have ever tried to define the word culture. Culture is probably the single most important part of data governance. And I went and talked to some of my PhD friends, and that are part of the social sciences, and said, explain culture to me, because everybody's telling me in data governance that culture is really, really important. What is it and how do I influence it? And what they said was, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's really just a collection of the corporate behaviors and viewpoints. Okay, so it's the executive team's thought processes. I'm trying to get people to manage data as an asset, and I want to change people who I have absolutely no access to at all on how they're thinking about data governance. And that just sounds like a lose-lose to me. So think about culture, think about what you've got and what you can work with. Culture is extremely difficult to change. And it's also something that's really hard to change from the bottom up. It's much easier to change it from the top down. And again, it's easier to change culture in a golden ticket moment. So look for those golden tickets. Do, whatever strategy you can in order to be able to influence it. Like with my data plans, I actually had success stories about how the plans were working. And so obviously Dana, somehow I think I influenced him, and he was like, yeah, we'll go ahead with that. So consider that. If you don't consider culture, your program is really high risk. The other big part about the people is your roles and responsibilities. So the people you ask to be in your community, what are the names of the roles and what is it that you want to do? And I say roles instead of positions because in data governance, it's unique in that it's a matrix organization with part-time people. So when you do not have performance control over people, they're doing things because they know it's the right thing. So you must talk much softer to them. And also you must make sure that when you ask them to do stuff, it's stuff that they believe will make their lives easier, not harder. So remove as much bureaucracy as possible and make things easy. So I try to have really clean roles and responsibilities. And the other thing you have, like with your framework, is you have these oversight boards. These are where you have your data governance council, your board, or your strategy committee, whatever they're called. You have those. They provide a little bit of input, and like I said earlier, you don't spend a lot of time with them. Then you have this thing that I call the Data Governance Office. Now, sometimes this is now being called the Chief Data Office. I've seen those two different words morphing. And I think we'll see even more of that. So this is a very, very tiny office with very, very few people in it. And they're basically the glue for data governance. They have very light processes. They provide advice. They're basically, if you have a piece of technology, which I'm advising at this time to have something, the Data Governance Office is the application owner of that technology. And they can also provide coaching and training, but they usually don't have more than about anywhere between 1 to 5 people. So tiny, tiny office that is not perceived as bureaucratic. You have working groups. They're typically around data domains. Master data is typical, but I have seen stuff on transactional groups. I've also seen a lot of stuff on KPIs and reports. Anything around data can work. It's just whatever your company wants to do. That's where all the real work happens. And I call it data domain stewardships because 90% of the people in those working groups are data stewards of some type. You have another group of people. This is more important in the beginning of a program than ongoing, but this is an interaction model. Sometimes people forget this piece, but when you're establishing data governance or refreshing it, you want to think about what other organizations exist in your company that do things that will help data governance. So you're basically borrowing part-time people from these groups, like privacy. Privacy plans sounds like a data plan. In fact, it probably is. It's just a different data scope. PMO people. You need PMO people to run a data program. Enterprise architect. Those people are really good at setting data strategies and standards. IT people. You need IT to be able to do all the technical stewardship work. Training. Somebody needs to provide and all the training that needs to go through. Communication. How do you set up and do a comm plan? Legal. There's some legal things that are important. Legal is somewhat related to security and privacy. You'll see legal with the GDPR and CCPA stuff. So all of this I would consider when I'm putting together a framework. Any kind of questions on this? This is pretty basic stuff. It's been around a while. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement on this piece anymore.
Yeah, I think the key things I kind of focused on the slide. I mean, culture is a word you hear all the time with governance. And I think, a lot of the attendees, I mean, we all live in this space, so we get that. It's kind of what you make of it, how you as a team kind of work together and communicate. But I think what you just mentioned at the end really hits home. It's, on adoption and kind of communicating out the benefits, right, and the value. It's where I've seen other programs fall short. You can build the greatest, program, but if nobody knows about it and no one's, kind of leveraging it, then there's not a lot of value, right? So it's that, I always call it kind of the finish line. Like, we've done all this great work, let's sell it, let's get it out there and adopt it in the organization, right? Because I think, and you mentioned going back to past jobs and history, a lot of times stuff like this is built kind of in a silo, right? So how do you democratize it to the organization? I think that's an area I've always kind of focused on. I always call it kind of the end game, right? Like, how do we get this in the hands of our users so that they're getting value?
Yep, I agree. Until they see it useful to them, they're not going to want to do it, which, if I was rolling this out, I would probably take a very, very tiny sliver of the company and try to provide value to that tiny group, a group that's important, that can basically then sell it for me.
Right. That is great, right, when that works out.
Sometimes it does. Again, at BP Natural Gas actually sold it for me. So I was really happy, which is why I was so ready to leave. Because like, what else can I do? I have accomplished what I want. Okay, if there's nothing else on this, let me go to the next slide. Your community. I put this in here. So particularly for the people that are new out there, is how many people do you need? I always, always, always get asked this. So there's a lot of people on these boards, but they don't meet very often, and they're all part-time kind of assignments. How many people in your office? Look, I've set up data governance with one person. When I worked at Accenture, 10 years Accenture, doing nothing but selling data governance to companies. In the beginning, it's usually one or two people. I just talked to a company in Oregon. So we're setting up data governance there. It's one person and it's part-time, and she's a supervisor of 20 other people. But I mean, she's committed to doing it. She has lots of energy, you know, and I'm sure she's going to be successful. But she's not trying to do too much. And she knows that she's just going to have to reuse what she's got with very, very few people. And then these working groups, that's where all your work gets done. And, you know, if you start rolling this out, like I've worked with some of the pharmaceutical companies over the last couple of years, they can be very, very big groups because they're global companies. So that's your community. And they're all special. So just take care of them and don't abuse them, I guess, because they're all matrixed except for the data governance office. These are all matrix, part-time, almost volunteer people. All right, let me go to see what else I have. You know, what does your framework look like? So this is the operating model piece. So it's really, what are your data governance processes? So these are the rules or the guardrails that you want the community to follow. So typically, if I was going to create processes, I used to have this really cool deck back in the day when I did manual. When I didn't have technology, I said, okay, there's 20 processes I can have. And I basically have this process hierarchy chart. And there were 6 or I guess 9 buckets now that I'm using big data. But it's like I'm setting up my community as a process. I'm managing my processes that I write. It's more the maintenance. I'm taking care of master data, system of records. I'm doing something with data quality. You know, I'm doing the whole ingestion into the lake. No, those are all the processes I have. I always forget this one. I'm actually doing the escalation. Like if I have a piece of data and we have disagreement on it, how do I escalate it? So you have those processes. In a manual world where you have as much time as you want, as much money as you want, you can manually create all these processes. But it's really better to have one of those newer technology platforms where you can automate your processes. Because data management, it's kind of weird, but it's pretty boring to people who aren't experts in data management. And so when you try to get the people in the business to do it, it's like, you want me to do that? Well, that's really A, boring, B, time consuming, and error prone. So if you can automate it, your community would be so happy, particularly if you can do it in a way that doesn't take a lot of heavy learning curve on their part. If you're just starting off, I still say you have to have a charter. The whole time I was at Accenture, I used the same document. I just kept updating it. It was a 10-page Word document. I had, I think, over 1,000 different companies in 10 years use it. It's just a piece of paper, standard operating procedure, SOP, that says, here's the scope of my program. I tell companies, write it once. You should never have to update it. It's at such a high level. So it's just an authorization. But when you're trying to get those data owners to actually do something, what you can do is you can take this charter, which someone important in the company is signed up to, and you can take it to them and say, look, the reason I'm talking to you is we have this new standard operating procedure, which by definition has to be done because the company said you have to do it. And here's why I'm engaging you. It just makes the conversation with your senior people much easier. And that's really why I like it. A question? Okay. Enablement materials. Usually when I'm building the framework. Sorry, I'm hearing some static. Did someone have a question? Okay. So when I'm building out data governance, I want to have some enablement material. And this is something that, you know, as a consultant, I would either build for them and then they would build it, but more often I would put together like a straw horse and then they would extend it out to their group. And this would basically be their early training materials. So they usually had a PowerPoint deck on what is data governance, What are the data governance roles and responsibilities? What are the processes? What's my operating model? What are all those people? You know, how does the data governance office work with the data stewards, with the council? So you'd have just a bunch of PowerPoint decks, and then you'd put them under configuration control. And in a perfect world, your training department would then like manage them on their training website, and then you'd have video snapshots of those. I would say that most adults can do 18 minutes. So if you could figure out how, and this was actually done by training organizations, they did these studies that said, if you can cut all your little snippets of learning into a series of 18 to 15 minute video clips, then when you're doing your courses, what you can do is you can take all of these different topic areas and string them together to do a course. Again, this is something I did at British Petroleum. I didn't have much money. I had $20,000, which isn't a lot for corporate rollout promotion. But what I did is I used that money to create some training stuff that I could automatically videotape. And I bought this software where I could have, I think we called it Talking Head at the time. It's older software. But again, it was like making an audio clip of people giving PowerPoint presentations, and then putting that onto a training server somewhere so that you can use it for enablement. And then keeping them at very short, like 15, 20 minute, like little snippets. So then as you're creating courseware, you can take all these different topic areas and combine them the way you want. So I found that to be extremely useful and a very low cost way to actually get training out that's usable. Because with data governance, what's interesting is classroom training is not value added for them, because your need to do training dribbles in. So you get 2 or 3 new stewards at a time, and you really want to do just-in-time training. So having something like this works out really well, and it's also cheaper than big classroom training. KPIs, I talked a little bit about this before. Just track a couple meaningful things where you really want your behavior to change, not creating new crazy behavior. Now, if I'm working in data governance, people say, well, what KPIs are the best ones? Well, if I've done a maturity model assessment, I would pick that one. I would also pick, if I have a data catalog, how many entries do I have in the data catalog, and track that. How many, so I'm counting how many data owners I have, how many data stewards. It's best if you can get stuff that's automated, because if you only have a team of 1 to 5, you can't really afford to have one of those people actually calculating manual KPIs. So you really want something automated, or as close to automation as possible. And then I would say, document your automation plan and then follow it, and then update it only once a year. Otherwise, you won't have a good benchmark and timeline on what your KPIs look like. Program plan, this is just your journey map on how you're establishing and maintaining data governance. I would say update it once a year. And then you have a bunch of other plans. You have this data plan that you want your data owners and stewards to write. You have a comm plan and a training plan and a promotion plan that your data governance office writes on how do you actually keep data governance running. Let me go to, if there's no questions, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. People always ask me, what is a data plan? Well, you've talked about this. You think this is so cool. What exactly is in it? Well, look, if you were trained in enterprise architecture, you're going to actually recognize these topic areas. This is, if enterprise architecture had worked, we wouldn't have created the field called data governance today. That's just my assessment. So look, it's a business data plan. I always have the data steward create it. I have the data owner approve it. And then I basically want them to tell me in an elevator pitch, what are you as a data owner taking care of? So if they were in an elevator with me and we were trapped and we had 90 seconds to talk, they could tell me their data subject areas. They could probably tell me that there's a problem with vendor master and that they would actually like to potentially bring in a new application to manage vendor master. Or maybe there's data quality issues, I don't know. Anyway, that very high level understanding of their data and what they want to do for it in the next couple of years, not this year, but in the next, I would say 3 to 5 years. That's what I want in a data plan. And then I usually give people an index of what to write about. So I give them a template. I think the first time I did this really big was when I was with Cisco, and we created these big plans. And it's like, tell me what your problem is. Tell me what your critical data elements are. Tell me what your data quality goals are. What are your system of records? What applications use your data? Do you want to do a certification? How do you want to certify? What's your business rules? What's your data definitions? How do you link all your plans? What's the link to your glossary and your dictionaries? And then I want people to use this plan to ask for IT money. This is basically a portfolio plan. So I'm stealing the idea from program management. And basically it's 3 years worth of healthy projects, because there's lots and lots of really great ideas, and hardly any of them on any 1 year cycle get approved. So this is just a plan to help you figure out which ones to go after. Any questions on this? It's actually a pretty simple idea, but it's powerful. Okay, trying to look at the time. We don't have that much time left. Communication and promotion. I already talked a bit about this, so I'll skip over this unless you guys have questions on it. Training plan, again, I usually give people templates on this and I let them put it out. You have lots of different options out there. You have the internal classes we talked about. Those are those little snippets like intro to data governance. You have vendor classes. So whatever technologies you pick, the vendors are actually going to provide technology. So use those. And then you have all these nonprofits like the data management societies, the data quality societies, your tag society. All of those have conferences, venues. Then you have certifications like the ICCP. So that was a board I was actually part of. So when I worked at BP, I actually had to use contract labor, and I was told which providers I had to use. So I would get stuck with them. And so Wipro, or was it Wipro, whoever I was told I had to use, they would constantly bring me process architects and tell me they were data architects, or vice versa. And so I talked to some of my friends in DAMA, and I said, look, I think we need a program called to certify people to be data governance professionals. And so we actually wrote a program. I actually feel good because I drove that program, and that became the first and the most popular certification on certified data governance professionals. You can still get it. And then DAMA also has one that's linked or aligned to it. It's the same people that wrote both. So you have certification, and then you can do job training by role. Let's see, data trust. So this is one of those new things coming in. So you want to put together something to improve trust. This has really been driven out of the GDPR and the CCPA and all those privacy regulations coming in. But the way to actually enable trust is you basically want to use what we call certification. So you'll often see people talk about certifications with gold, silver, and bronze. And so what are you certifying? Well, guess what? It's almost exactly the same things you start off with the data plan. It's like the name, the definition. Is a steward assigned to it, yay or nay? Now, as you're going through certification, I usually ask people to go really slow. Your bronze level certification for a piece of data may be that the piece of data is identified as formally governed. It has an assigned data steward, and it has a definition. And potentially, you as a company could decide that's what bronze means, excuse me. And then what you can do is you can ramp up and make your certification more difficult over a couple years. Again, do it as a journey. Don't try to do it all at once, because you won't get anything certified. And technology is helping in this space. So most of the technology data governance platforms have a mechanism for certification built directly into them. Let's see, Lineage. Lineage is what's cool. Everybody wants Lineage. It's going to help you understand your data. It's going to help with breaches, software development, impact analysis. It's going to make data more fun. Oh my gosh, this is now fun. Anyone that's done manual Lineage knows how boring it is. So having automated Lineage in a tool is going to be amazing fun, and it should reduce the cost of data management, because if you have bad stuff happen, like a breach, you got to do Lineage. If you want to do upgrades or impact analysis, you have to have somebody go through the code and figure it out. And it's just really, really time consuming and really boring and error prone. Okay. I was going to talk about technology. I left it at the end. I got 90 seconds list. Look, this is the list of technology that I got at a survey I took yesterday. These are all the things that the person that owned the survey said, here's your data governance landscape. Again, all I say is you probably need a piece of technology. I work for a technology company, obviously. I'm not going to tell you which one to buy, but you pretty much have to have one at this point, and you're going to get what you pay for. So pick something and then stick with it for a while. Let's see what else I have here. And then how do you pick your technology? Pick somebody you can trust. Consider automation. What you're really trying to do is make the lives of your stewards easier, better, less boring. You want to have modern stuff. So, I mean, look for somebody that can do automation. They can do machine learning. You want somebody in those analyst reports that's hidden in your upper right-hand quadrant. You want to have something that works with your ecosystem. So if you're an SAP company and all your systems of records are SAP and all you really care about is putting around vendor, product, master, all those, maybe your data governance has to be something friendly to SAP. So consider that. And then the other thing is don't keep changing your technology, because that's not cost effective. And then I think that's all I have. Oh, here's my last one. Manage data as an asset. What's really, really amazing cool is these populated data catalogs, because they now give you a system of record for data. They also give you an inventory of data. You combine the two of those, and we can actually now, with this piece of technology, properly enabled, we're going to get to the point where very soon we're going to be able to manage data as an asset, which means we'll be able to put data on our balance sheets. And so with that, I think I just hit at the end of the hour. That's my coolest point to make. Any questions?
That was fantastic, Mona. Thank you for running through all that material. Really good material, really relevant for the group. And I definitely learned a few things, and I'm sure the audience did as well. So, just wanted to thank you for agreeing to present today, and thank Collibra for sponsoring us. Just on the housekeeping side for the tag, our next event's just going to be a networking event towards the end of July. We haven't booked a location yet. We're hoping to do that one live. So watch the calendar for that. Hopefully we can all get together safely for a networking event. And then our big signature events in October, it's the executive exchange. So, again, keep an eye on the calendar. Look forward to seeing you all soon. And thanks for attending. And Mona, again, thank you. Look forward to keeping in touch.
Okay, thanks so much. You guys have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.